Morning. This is lecture 19 in abnormal psychology. I was talking last time about the personality disorders, and particularly it started to talk about the cluster B disorders. Again, these are just kind of logical groupings of personality disorders. I was talking about antisocial personality and some aspects of it. And a point that I made last time that I want to kind of go back to is the fact that there are kind of two approaches here. The DSM has taken very much the approach, particularly in renaming this first disorder antisocial personality, in focusing on the interpersonal consequences of behavior. So these are the DSM criteria. Failure to conform to social norms regarding the law and leading to acts that result in repeated arrests. So it's very much talking about what happens to the person because of their behavior. They get arrested. Deceit or lying for personal profit or pleasure, and again it's the idea that the person is doing something to manipulate others. Impulsivity and failure to plan is more on the personality side, but is certainly looking at negative consequences. Aggressiveness, repeated fights are part of the definition of the disorder. So it's not just that the person has certain personality traits, but that it leads to antisocial behavior. Reckless disregard for the safety of others or self. This is driving too fast, using drugs, etc. Irresponsibility regarding work or financial obligations. Difficulty holding a job, not paying one's bills, that kind of thing. And again, it's the results that are being focused on. And the contrast to that is the kind of coexisting concept of the psychopathic personality, which preceded antisocial in the DSM thinking, but a lot of people continue to do research on this as a somewhat separate concept. And here the focus is much more on personality traits, inability to empathize with others, absence of conflict, guilt, and anxiety, inability to profit from experience, although we saw with some of the research last time that that depends upon the nature of the consequences. Again, impulsive, consistent with the antisocial personality. Difficulty with meaningful relationships and manipulative. You can certainly see that there's an overlap here, but they're somewhat different, and the focus is very different. And I think I talked last time about the idea that if you take this more personality perspective, you can conceptualize the successful psychopath, the person who may have some of these traits, but who doesn't have the legal problems, the aggression, etc., and that some of these traits may be useful in certain kinds of occupations or positions in life. I also want to talk about a kind of theoretical idea about the nature of this personality type. And again, I'm going to try to draw you a graph here. There's a well-known relationship between performance and arousal. With simple tasks, if you're sorting something or whatever, arousal tends to facilitate. Being a little anxious, being up, tends to make you do better on the task. If you have a task that is somewhat more complicated kind of medium complexity, you like doing simple math problems or something like that, where it takes some thought but it's not fairly rote, then arousal helps early on, but too much arousal can hinder performance, and performance goes down with if you're too anxious, too tense. And with very complex tasks, if you're trying to do some problem solving or think through some decision that you need to make, then you tend to do much better if you are relaxed, and any kind of arousal reduces your performance level. It gets in the way, it interferes with doing well. Now, this is sort of generally well demonstrated about different tasks, and we can talk about this generally for people in general. But the further way of thinking about this is that some people start out with different baselines of arousal, so they're operating normally in different parts of this dimension. And the differentiation that's sometimes made is between augmenters and reducers. Augmenters are people whose nervous systems tend to to turn up arousal, to start out already fairly aroused. So you have augmenters who are kind of operating at this range of the spectrum here. And for these people, almost any increase in arousal decreases their performance. So they are people who are sort of reinforced by things that are more calming, that keep them from getting too stressed or excited. And at the other end, you have reducers. These are people, the idea is that their nervous system kind of dampens down arousal. It takes a lot to get through. So they're chronically under-aroused people. And for them, anything in this, virtually anything here that increases arousal increases performance, and therefore is rewarding and reinforcing for them in this span. And if you take this kind of idea, then you can think of antisocial personality, psychopathic personality individuals as being reducers, as being people who are chronically under-aroused and for whom arousal is beneficial and improves performance and is reinforcing. They're people who seek out, they're sensation seekers, they seek out excitement. Impulsivity, doing things impulsively, may produce that kind of extra arousal and be reinforcing. And if you think back to the earlier chapters about the physiology of anxiety disorders, etc., these are people who, in Foll's terms, would have weak behavioral inhibition systems. They don't have, they're low on, again, neuroticism. They don't have a lot of anxiety. So again, arousal is reinforcing. Along the same kind of line, there is some research that suggests that another kind of psychological aspect of psychopathy is difficulty in delaying gratification or delaying reinforcement. Would you prefer to have a small candy bar today or a really big candy bar next week? The person with difficulty in delaying gratification would take the immediate reinforcement. And there is research on people with psychopathic personalities, etc., that tends to suggest that they are more likely to take the immediate reward. And this may have to do with difficulty in delaying, but it also, you can think of it as possibly being related to social histories. It may be that these are also people whose environment has not been conducive to waiting for delays, where it's much better to take what you can get at the moment because you can't count on reinforcement later on. There's some evidence for a genetic component to antisocial personality. In particular, there tend to be father-son combinations. It may be, again, that what we're talking about here is that whatever is inherited may be displayed differently for males and for females. You may see different disorders diagnosed in females in the same families. There are twin studies, and monozygotic twins are more likely to also get the diagnosis than dizygotic twins, and there have been adoption studies that go along with this. There's some recent Swedish studies suggesting that they're looking at criminality that suggests that the genetic component for criminality is actually higher in women than it is in men. May have fewer women committing crimes, but the genetic component may be higher. There are also environmental factors that contribute to this disorder, and there's been a lot of research on the early family backgrounds. Tends to be associated with lower socioeconomic status and with inconsistency of discipline. These tend to be people who have come from homes where the discipline was very inconsistent and lax, but on the other hand very harsh. So you may not be disciplined regularly, but when you are disciplined, the punishment tends to be harsh. And this might explain the lack of response to punishment. If punishment is sort of unpredictable but inevitable, you just take it and are not much bothered by it. Often unstable childhood environments, adoption, foster homes, that sort of thing. The problem, of course, is that a lot of this research tends to be done with prison populations, with criminal populations. So again, the research is emphasizing the antisocial outcomes and the early childhoods of those with the antisocial outcomes. Another distinction that's sometimes made in this literature is between, and this is again looking kind of at studies of criminals, is the distinction between socialized and unsocialized criminals. And this goes back into the literature on delinquency, etc. There are some people who get in trouble who engage in antisocial acts in groups. That is, there are people who have friends with whom they engage in delinquent behavior, whatever it might be. And there are others who are sort of loners who don't have any friends, the ones who don't have the meaningful relationships, etc. And there's a much more negative prognosis for those who are the loners. The idea is, can the person relate to others and form relationships? They may have formed relationships with sort of the wrong group, but the ability to form a relationship has a better prognosis for some kind of more positive adjustment later on. I heard a talk by a psychiatrist a few years ago who was doing evaluations of adolescents for the courts. And she talked about the fact that the number one thing she was kind of looking for when she was doing her interview and whatever she did was could the person relate to her. And she talked about the fact that she would sometimes have somebody who just almost didn't know how to be in a conversation with somebody or to be able to answer questions in an orderly and logical fashion. And in those instances, that was the kind of the most negative prognosis for whether that person was likely to be amenable to some kind of rehabilitation or whether they were likely to have more problems in the future. There's relatively little research on treatment for antisocial personality. There are some residential programs for children and adolescents. There's an approach called reality therapy, which attempts to sort of make rules very clear and consequences, and tries to help children have a very consistent environment in which they can sort of learn to get along and follow the rules. The next, any comments on antisocial personality or psychopathic personality or any of those issues? Okay, the next personality disorder that I want to talk about is borderline personality disorder. And again, I've tried to crowd the diagnostic, the DSM criteria onto some of these slides. Borderline is, as opposed to antisocial, where there's been lots of research, there's been lots of writing about borderline, but research has been more recent, and there's probably less research. The perhaps core feature of borderline is this idea of fear of abandonment, and the DSM actually uses the term frantic efforts to avoid abandonment. Unstable and intense interpersonal relationships. These are people for whom you are either the best, most important friend that they've ever had, or you're their worst enemy, and they go back and forth from day to day as to which category you're in. They tend to shift their view and become very upset at minor kinds of things in relationships. They also may overestimate the nature of relationships, think that they're more intense and close than other people view them. They share that characteristic with other personality disorders in this group, with narcissistic and histrionic in particular. That's one of the points I want to make as I go through, is to kind of point out which characteristics tend to be shared with the other personality disorders here. This is part of the reason why if you get one diagnosis, you get another, particularly in this group, and why they are somewhat unreliable. One person might give one diagnosis and one another, depending on what they're emphasizing. Identity disturbance, unstable self-image, just as the other people in their lives may be all good or all bad, they themselves may view themselves as good at one point and bad at another point. Some people have described this personality disorder as the as-if personality, and suggesting that the person is always kind of trying to react to the other person and behave as if they were whatever they think the other person would like. I once had a patient who described herself in this regard. She said she thought of herself as a pretzel, that she was constantly twisting herself and trying to turn herself, knot herself into whatever she thought the other person who she was interacting with was looking for. She was always trying to please and never had a sense of sort of a real consistent self. She was whatever she thought other people wanted her to be. Self-damaging impulsivity. Again, impulsivity is kind of runs through these diagnoses. The idea that it's self-defeating is perhaps emphasized a little bit more here. It's doing things that end up getting you in trouble. The person who I was just talking about had a tendency to get jobs, then dislike the job, and find ways to smile and work hard and get herself fired by annoying people in various ways. Recurrent suicidal behavior, acts, gestures, threats. Self-mutilation is also included here. Self-mutilation is things like cutting oneself. I wouldn't actually put that necessarily in the suicidal behavior category. It's often the people who I've talked to who are cutters, who cut themselves, say that they do it because the physical pain masks the kind of psychological pain that they have, and it's almost better to have the physical pain than the psychological pain. These are people who will take razor blades and just cut themselves, often in areas where the body where it won't be seen. Affective instability. This is again the idea of mood shifts, rapid extreme mood shifts, mood reactivity. Something that happens to them may set them off, and they go from being seemingly doing fine and being happy to being extremely depressed or angry or whatever the emotion might be. Chronic feelings of emptiness. This is related to the kind of fear of abandonment, feelings of not being a person, not being worthy, etc. Inappropriate intense anger, and under stress, transient paranoia or dissociation. You can add to this at times grandiosity, somewhat like narcissistic personality, difficulty in taking the other person's perspective, that is lacking empathy. These are characteristics that are kind of shared with throughout this cluster of disorders. And they're often difficult patients, demanding, emotional, manipulative, etc. And again, since many of these disorders have their origin in kind of problematic patients, they are all seen as sort of negative prognostic factors for psychotherapy. The emphasis in psychotherapy here is that these are the unstable nature of the relationships. They think you're the greatest person and you're surely going to help them, and then the next day when you are held up and are 5 minutes late in your appointment, you don't care about them at all, and you're a terrible person, etc. It overlaps again with the other personality disorders, particularly histrionic and narcissistic. And again, you see, if you get one diagnosis, you have a high probability of getting one of the others. Some people see borderline as part of the bipolar disorder spectrum. The shifts in emotionality from positive to negative in some ways are parallel to the manic and depressive kinds of episodes, at least in a more reduced way. And indeed, about a small percentage, one estimate is 4%, actually get a diagnosis also of bipolar disorder. 32% also get a diagnosis of major depression. Depression is common in borderline disorder. These are people who have kind of chaotic lives, continuing to be upset in interpersonal relationships. 17% also diagnosed with dysthymia, 5% with cyclothymia, again, all in this mood disorder kind of spectrum. Some, on the other hand, some people have argued that this belongs in the schizophrenia spectrum. Some of the kind of paranoia and dissociation are somewhat like some of the symptoms of schizophrenia. And it's also been identified with trauma-related disorders since early childhood abuse, physical abuse or sexual abuse is also very common. The estimates are that about 3/4 of those people who are diagnosed with this are women. It accounts for perhaps 8% of the population. Very common in outpatient settings, perhaps 27% of outpatients, 15% of inpatients. And remember, these may be co-diagnosed with other disorders. The person may be seeking treatment for their depression, but also be diagnosed with the Axis II diagnosis. One of the things I was looking at as I was going along here was the book that's referenced in your syllabus, the Danny Wedding book on psychopathology in the movies, and he identifies Glenn Close in Fatal Attraction as the borderline case that's well known in the media. A woman in the movie who has a one-night stand, but believes that this is a much more important relationship than the guy does, and reacts with extreme anger and aggression. The concept has kind of psychodynamic origins. Otto Kernberg is one who described this, and part of the psychodynamic idea is that in early childhood, in infancy virtually, one of the first things that a child, an infant, learns is the distinction between what's me and what's the world, what's part of physically me and what's the external world, that differentiation, and sort of good and bad. There are good states, being warm and fed and held and that sort of thing, and there are bad states, being hungry and cold and such, and that these in normal development, these ideas are integrated and differentiated, and you can have good and bad, self and other, in varying degrees. But that the concept is that the borderline personality sort of doesn't integrate these and keeps them separate, so that everything is one or the other. It's all or none. I'm good or I'm bad, you're good or you're bad, and there's no bringing those things together. One thing can't have both good and bad properties, and so it's that kind of all or none reaction and response to others in the world, and that kind of thinking about self as well. This is one of the personality disorders for which there is some actual treatment research. Marsha Linehan at the University of Washington has developed what she refers to as a dialectic behavior therapy program. And she sees borderline disorder as being sort of self-destructive impulsivity that is a sort of learned way to resolve problems. If you're in a problem situation, you do something self-destructive and you get yourself fired or whatever and get out of the situation, and that you reduce your negative emotion by this impulsiveness. She sees it as being associated with early childhood abuse, where you can perhaps avoid the negative feelings by impulsive behaviors of various sorts. And also, if you've been abused, you may have kind of received the message that you're either all good or you're all bad. In any case, Linehan's, this is a long-term treatment. It tends to take a minimum of a couple of years, but the idea is to help the person develop better problem-solving skills, and one of the things that the evidence suggests is that it does reduce suicidal behavior and such. There's also some cognitive therapy approaches for borderline and the other personality disorders. There are a couple of, there's less evidence, but there are books out on how to do cognitive therapy with borderline disorder, etc., based on clinical experience. Any comments on borderline? Thoughts? Histrionic personality disorder. This was, the old term was hysterical personality, but that had sexist historical meaning wandering womb was the idea for hysteria long ago. Histrionic, these are people who are overly kind of dramatic and exaggerated in their emotional expression. Criteria include being uncomfortable when not the center of attention. These are people who want everybody to be talking to them or about them, or uncomfortable if they're at a party and other people are having conversations that don't include them. They want to be sort of the center of, constantly the center of attention. Inappropriately seductive or provocative in relationships, again, trying to draw attention to themselves. Rapidly shifting shallow emotions, again, somewhat like borderline. And the emphasis here is on the sort of drama, but lack of actual deep emotion. Uses physical appearance to draw attention, and again may dress inappropriately to focus attention on them. Impressionistic speech lacking in detail. The idea kind of goes along with the shallow emotions, that these are people who have difficulty expressing detailed emotions. What do you think of that person? Oh, that person is fabulous. Well, what do you like about them? Oh, they're just fabulous. They have difficulty. These are general impressions without any real deep analysis in their language and expression. Dramatic, exaggerated emotional expression. And again, this is kind of shared with narcissistic personality, but these are people who sort of overplay every scene that they're in, if you will. Theatricality is another term for the characteristic. Also suggestible, easily influenced by others. Given sort of a shallow emotional person who over-exaggerates and over-interprets relationships, they are easily sort of taken in by others. And again, considers relationships more intense than they are, again, shared with borderline personality. And probably has the general characteristics of difficulties in perspective taking, lacking emotional empathy, and also seen as difficult patients, demanding, emotional, etc. Unlikely to persist in therapy, which is, again, probably for all of the cluster B disorders, that's sort of an assumption. They're difficult to establish a relationship with and retain in therapy. Danny Wedding's book suggests that Blanche Dubois in A Streetcar Named Desire is a fictional example of a histrionic personality who is, again, very dramatic and provocative in her relationships. I was going to raise the question, do you think Anna Nicole Smith was histrionic in her behavior? Might be another example. Prevalence of the disorder is not clear, partly because there have been somewhat shifting criteria, and so studies done with one set of criteria may not be applicable to new criteria. It's more frequently diagnosed in women, and there's an interesting argument here that the criteria themselves may be gender biased. If you give descriptions, if you write a description of an antisocial personality and write a description of a person with histrionic characteristics, if you give either one of them a male name, they're more likely to be given antisocial personality as a diagnosis. If you give either one of them a female name, they're more likely to be diagnosed as histrionic. So they may carry some enough similar features that they are partly sex-typed versions of the same disorder. And some people argue that they're sort of what they are extreme cultural stereotypes. The antisocial is kind of the macho male stereotype taken to extreme, and the histrionic personality is kind of the provocative, seductive female taken to the extreme, and that they may be, again, culture-based diagnoses. High on extroversion in both cases here. Again, if you think in terms of more basic personality characteristics, again, with a lack of insight into their effects on others, tend, although easily manipulated, may be manipulative as well, and may also be sort of low on behavioral inhibition in the Foles BIS-BAS system. Again, treatment is difficult, and there aren't many studies. This is seen as a kind of heterogeneous group of people, and there are not specific research studies much on treatment. Cognitive therapy stresses trying to help them develop autonomy, realistic appraisals, do role-playing, and help them to take on the other person's role, understand the other person's role, and their effect on other people. Comments or questions? Narcissistic personality. Narcissus is the character in mythology who was very handsome and saw his own reflection in a pool and fell in love with himself. So narcissism is sort of self-love. Grandiose self-importance. These are people who tend to exaggerate their achievements and talents, expect to be recognized as superior even without a superior kind of achievement. Preoccupied with fantasies of success, power, brilliance, beauty, etc. So they're always sort of imagining heroic deeds or other kinds of successes. They believe they're special or unique and that they can only be understood by other special, unique people, and they should associate with high status, special people as well. Requires excessive admiration. They're constantly seeking compliments from others, seeking support. A sense of entitlement. The idea here is that they expect special treatment or automatic compliance with their requests. The example that I remember a friend of mine telling me about a patient who, a narcissistic patient who called up one day and said, I know our appointment is for tomorrow, but I'm in the neighborhood and I wonder if you could see me today. And the psychologist looked at his schedule and said, gee, I'm sorry, but I'm all booked up. And the patient said, but I'm right around the corner. It was as if, I'm here, it's convenient to me, of course you should be able to do something to make your schedule open. Interpersonally exploitive, tends to take advantage of others. Again, if you think that you are special and deserve special treatment, then you don't have to worry much about the rights of others. Lacking empathy, unwilling to acknowledge the needs of others, often envious and believe that others envy them. Arrogant behavior and attitudes. If you've ever seen the old movie Sunset Boulevard, Gloria Swanson in that movie is cited as a narcissistic personality who, in her a fading star past her prime, who thinks that any day now she's going to have her career revived, and leaves the house in the end with the line, I'm ready for my close-up now, Mr. DeMille, from that movie, I believe. Low prevalence, often seen with other personality disorders. Again, this is one that's less well studied and is often diagnosed in combination with other personality disorders, and no specific treatment. In terms of treatment with all of the cluster B personality disorders, there are sort of generally accepted sort of rules about trying to do therapy with such individuals. You should proceed with clear, low-level goals that start out with concrete kinds of goals. Make sure the patient agrees with the goals, trying to build, be sure that you have an alliance, that you're both going in the same direction. It's important to build rapport, and important to keep a constant kind of check on the relationship. How is the person viewing you and the nature of relationship? Is anything bothering them about it? Do they have unrealistic expectations for you or for the relationship? And progress feedback is important to, again, keep you both on track for whether you're making progress toward the goals that you do have agreed upon. And one of the interesting kinds of rules is don't expect that the patient lives in a reasonable world. Often patients with these diagnoses live in families or environments that they have in part created with other people who also share some of these characteristics. So I can remember, again, a patient talking about her relationship with her mother, and her mother having gotten upset with her and literally threw her out of the house, took her belongings and threw them out on the front lawn and said, "Get out, you're no longer my daughter, I don't want to ever see you again," and then called her up a couple days later and said, "But of course you're coming home for Thanksgiving." So that the environment in which she was trying to exist was not one that was very consistent or logical either. And again, various adaptations of cognitive therapy tend to be used. That's the cluster B disorders. Again, comments, thoughts? Cluster C of the personality disorders are kind of the anxiety related disorders. Avoidant personality. I talked about this a little earlier when we talked about social phobia. Some people would argue that avoidant personality is kind of the extreme generalized end of the dimension of the of social phobia. These are individuals who avoid interpersonal contact for fear of criticism, disapproval, or rejection. They're people who will avoid occupations, for example, where they need to interact with other people. They'll find jobs where they can be kind of solitary and work without having to interact with other people. Maybe being the technician who repairs the whatever it is in the back room and doesn't interact with doesn't have to interact with customers. That kind of job. Unwilling to get involved unless they're sort of assured that they will be accepted and liked in situations. So again, avoiding interpersonal relationships where there's any kind of interpersonal danger of not being accepted. Restraint in intimate relationships, again, having difficulty in even when they are accepted and liked, in feeling that they can reciprocate because of the wanting to go slowly and be assured of not being rejected. Being preoccupied with being criticized or rejected. Inhibited by feelings of inadequacy. These are people who think that they are going to be perceived as inadequate because in fact they are, and view self as inept, unappealing, or inferior, and reluctant to take interpersonal risks. And again, these are all kind of interrelated ideas. I think I'm probably using the same examples here that I used when I talked about social anxiety in part, but one person who I once saw comes to mind when I look at these criteria, and this is the guy who viewed himself as always kind of one down in any situation, again viewed himself as inept, unappealing, and inferior, and therefore he had to try to fool people, to put one over on them, to pretend, put on a mask of adequacy in situations. And that meant that there was no possible win for him. He either appeared inadequate or he fooled them into not seeing that he was inadequate, but every situation validated that he was inadequate. And sort of there was no way to feel that he was successful. And another individual who I saw at one point was kind of the extreme of lacking in social interpersonal skills, spoke in a monotone, didn't establish eye contact, kind of looked at the floor, and he was the one who, in terms of a job, he was a waiter in a hotel in the banquet service, because in the banquet service you don't have to interact with people as you might in the restaurant. You really just, bring some more water or some more iced tea if somebody wants it, but that's the nature. That's as far as you have to interact. And he was offered a promotion several times, but he resisted it because being promoted to captain or whatever would mean that he'd have to tell other people what to do, and that was completely beyond what he was able to consider. He was socially motivated. He wanted to date. He would occasionally go to bars or other places and try to approach women, but generally very unskillfully. You want to dance? He kind of describe himself as that sort of approach to somebody. And that's characteristic of this disorder, is that there's a desire for social interaction, for social relationships, but a fear of them and reluctant to engage. And that's in contrast to the schizoid personality that we talked about, where there's no motivation for interpersonal relationships. The person has no interest and doesn't get any gratification from interpersonal relationships. Therapy for avoidant personality tends to be social skill building, cognitive therapy for the distortions of about self and inadequacy, trying to demonstrate to the person that they do have skills and talents and abilities that may be appreciated by others, having them test out the reaction and response they're really getting from other people. Dependent personality is the second one in this cluster. And just as the term suggests, need to be taken care of, kind of clinging behavior, fears of separation and abandonment, common with some of the other disorders. All of these, part of the definition of the personality disorders is they begin in early childhood, and you have lists like this, takes 5 out of 8 in this particular list. Difficulty making decisions, again, wanting reassurance or direction from others, needs others to assume responsibility, looks for someone else to tell them what to do. Difficulty expressing disagreement. Again, there's a fear of rejection or criticism as part of this, abandonment. Difficulty initiating projects on their own, goes to excessive lengths to obtain support. Uncomfortable alone. There may be people who just, the physical fact of being alone may be uncomfortable for them. They need somebody else around to give them support. When a relationship ends, urgently seeks another relationship to take its place, and preoccupation with fears of being left to take care of themselves. Again, this shares a lot with borderline disorder, the fear of abandonment, the need to for reassurance, and shares some with social phobia in terms of the concern with rejection, etc. Danny Wedding's book suggests that Bill Murray and What About Bob is an example of dependent personality, where he follows his psychiatrist to on vacation so that he is always around him and has somebody to depend upon. And again, no specific treatment here. This is support and confidence building kinds of things. Obsessive compulsive personality disorder. Again, this is sort of related to obsessive compulsive disorder, but without the clear rituals. Preoccupation with orderliness, perfectionism, and mental and interpersonal control, and at the expense of flexibility, openness, and efficiency. Again, beginning in early adulthood. Preoccupied with details, lists, rules, order, organization, and schedules. Perfectionism that interferes with completion. May never feel that whatever they're doing is good enough and postpones completion over and over again. I saw a young woman not too long ago who was diagnosed both with ADHD and with obsessive compulsive personality. And the school where she was going, because of the ADHD, gave her accommodations so that she could have as long as she needed to take a test. But because of her compulsive perfectionism, in one instance, she showed up for an exam that was at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and she finished the exam at 3 o'clock the next morning. And the professor had stayed up through the night to wait for her to complete her exam at 3 a.m. Devoted to work to the exclusion of leisure and interpersonal relationships. So these may be workaholic type people who, again, because of their need for perfectionism and for feeling productive, may exclude other things in their lives. Overly conscientious, scrupulous, and inflexible. I remember asking one patient at one point who was very much oriented towards needing to be perfect in everything he did. I asked him, well, what about things like, what if you were going to make a phone call on a public phone, you found a quarter in the slot? So I'd leave it there. It didn't belong to me, belonged probably to the phone company. What about if you saw a penny on the sidewalk in front of you? It's not my penny. It would be dishonest of me to pick it up. The person who dropped that penny might come back for it. So I wouldn't pick it up. Talked about conflicts he'd had with his wife. They'd been on vacation and they'd rented a car, and she'd been reading the travel magazine and said, gee, it's only about 3 miles over to see some monument or whatever it was. I don't know what it was. But he said, no, that's across the state line. And the car contract said we were only renting the car to drive in whatever it was, California or Oregon or something like that. And driving across the state line, even though it's only a mile, would be violating the contract, and I won't do that. I can't do that. So he was, every rule had to be followed, and he very much felt if he failed to follow any rule, that was sort of where does it stop? If you don't do 100%, if you consider anything less than 100% perfectionism, then you're giving in to dishonesty and slovenliness and et cetera, et cetera. Unable to discard worn out or worthless things. I knew another patient who, his ideal in his apartment would have been to have shelves where he had his catalogs, all the latest of each of the catalogs that he liked to order things from occasionally. And he also would like to have had files filing the articles that he'd cut out of magazines. But what tended to happen was he'd want to get around to cutting the articles out of the magazine, and might cut them out or not, but the magazine would stay sitting there, and he wouldn't want to get rid of the magazine because he still would want to go through to see if there's an article to cut out. And they never got put in the file cabinet, and the catalogs never got sorted as to which were the new ones, so they literally piled up to the point where there was no place in his apartment to sit down anymore because of the stacks of magazines and catalogs that had piled up over months and months. And the idea of just taking them and tossing them out en masse was just inconceivable to him. Reluctant to delegate. Again, if you're perfectionistic and nobody else is going to be able to do it to your standards, so asking somebody else to help out or do part of a job is very difficult. Miserly is on the list here. The kind of outlook is that money is to be saved and put away for the rainy day, and it's foolish to spend money when you might need it later on. Rigid and stubborn, and again, this is kind of the inflexibility that goes along with it has to be done in a particular way. In some ways, the line between this and the obsessive-compulsive disorder is a fine line. In other ways, the difference is the clear obsessive thoughts and the rituals. But what is a ritual? If you're doing something kind of senseless repeatedly, that's clearly a ritual. But if you're lining up your pencils in perfect order on your desk and making sure that they're square with the edge of the desk, that starts to come close to a ritual as well. So it's sometimes definitionally a little bit problematic as to which is which. Again, if you look at examples from the films, Jack Nicholson in As Good As You Get probably is obsessive-compulsive disorder because he does have some rituals, repeated washing and things like that. Tony Shalhoub as Monk similarly has some of both. He's certainly perfectionistic in the way he wants things orderly, but may also perform some kinds of rituals. Another one that's suggested in the Daniel Wedding book is Jack Lemmon in The Odd Couple, and he probably fits more into the obsessive-compulsive personality as being neat and orderly, but not necessarily showing senseless rituals. Treatment tends to be similar to treatment for obsessive-compulsive disorder, sort of exposure and response prevention, trying to get people to be able to tolerate less than perfection. The woman I was talking about who took the, whatever it was, 14 hours to take the exam, one of the things I had her do was just to, she liked to do sketches and such, and I had her practice doing some things and also writing some things and doing whatever she could in 15 minutes and then accepting that and not having to have it perfect. So do a sketch of something and just stop after 15 minutes and tolerate it being okay and not having to work on it for hours and hours until it was just the way she wanted, and similarly to kind of write descriptions of experience without having to write them perfectly. She tended to, when she was working on a paper, she would spend hours and hours because she would go back over the same sentences and rewrite the sentences and kind of redo them over and over again. There are the diagnostic manual kind of has an appendix which includes diagnoses that are there for the purposes of facilitating research, but don't quite meet the qualifications for being in the diagnostic manual. And I just want to mention those. The first two have been kind of controversial. Sadistic personality disorder, again, this kind of going along with sexual disorder of sadistic behavior of deriving pleasure from inflicting pain or humiliation on others, and self-defeating being the kind of masochistic. The self-defeating has been particularly criticized as possibly kind of blaming the victim. People who repeatedly, the idea is that these are people who repeatedly get themselves into victim kinds of situations where they are mistreated in various ways, and the concern is that it is blaming the victim for getting themselves in these situations. Passive-aggressive, it's been arguable as to whether this is really a coherent personality disorder. Passive-aggressive behavior may occur in lots of people and in different disorders, but whether or not it is a coherent disorder is arguable, and the evidence tends to be sort of in the negative, and I think it's likely to be removed. I've seen passive-aggressive behavior. One of the first cases that I was ever involved in as a graduate student, seeing with a faculty member, we were seeing a family, and what was going on in this family was that sort of everybody agreed that Dad was in charge and was the head of the family, but then everybody went off and did whatever they felt like it, and sort of ignored the agreed upon rules. And it was kind of a chaotic family. I remember them coming into sessions. They'd all arrive independently at different times, and this was mother, father, and two boys. And one of the issues had to do with their budget. They were constantly overspending and never seemed to be able to keep the spending within a budget. And finally, the wife sort of persuaded, with the support of us in therapy, to let her have the checkbook and be in charge of the spending. And the husband was very reluctant to give this up because it was symbolically part of his believing that he was in charge of everything. But he reluctantly gave in, and she took over the checkbook. And a month later they came in, and she was there first, well before he arrived, and we were talking to her. The kids were there, and she said, well, we didn't quite make it on budget, but we came really close this month, and I think I got it under control at this point, and I'm sure next month I can bring us in within budget. And at that point, Father showed up, and laden with boxes, and he came in and said, well, since we blew the budget again as usual this month, I bought everybody a present. So here's something for you, here's something for you, here's something for you. Now, how can you be mad at somebody who has just bought you a present? But clearly what he was doing was undermining her running the budget and trying to sort of undercut it. So he was passively, not overtly, being aggressive in the situation. He was trying to negate her efforts in this kind of passive way. So that kind of behavior may occur in different personalities or different kinds of people. The question is whether it is really is there a person type who is consistently passive aggressive. Another one that's had some controversy is now referred to as premenstrual dysphoric disorder. It was earlier late luteal phase dysphoric disorder. This is women who have extreme mood shifts during their menstrual cycle, and it was first called late luteal phase, but then it was realized that it wasn't always late luteal phase. It might be in different phases of the menstrual cycle. But there does seem to be some evidence that some women have extreme responses, so it kind of continues to be a focus of some research. Depressive personality is, I think, a little difficult to fit into the depression spectrum. We already have dysthymic disorder, which is kind of like a depressive personality. But the assumption here is that this is more a pessimistic person, the person who constantly sees things in a negative way, but doesn't necessarily meet the criteria for a depressive episode or even for dysthymia. There is another concept that's around, we talk about major depression. There's also the concept of minor depression. Minor depression means you're assessed on the same criteria, and instead of meeting whatever it is 4, you meet 3 of the criteria or something like that. This is different still and emphasizes more the pessimistic and negative psychological outlook. So those are, again, in there for further research. I think it kind of further extends the idea that these are an unsystematic collection of different conceptions of personality types that are not very systematically organized. And the last thing then that I want to mention about personality disorders is that there are various attempts to try to apply scientific research methods to classify the personality disorders or classify the behaviors and the traits in a more systematic way. And this is one example of it. This is a factor analytic mathematical solution by Whittaker, who's a prominent researcher in this area. And what it's saying is that he thinks that the personality disorders, or the phenomena of the personality disorders, can be reduced down to 3 dimensions. One dimension is a desire for social contact, and you have dependent, borderline, histrionic, and avoidant on one side. They're all people who desire social contact, versus those who don't desire social contact, schizoid and paranoid personalities. The second is one of kind of assertiveness and dominance versus the lack of assertiveness and submission, with narcissistic and histrionic being on one side and schizoid on the other side. And the last one is anxious rumination, where you have the sort of anxious personalities in the schizoid, paranoid, avoidant, versus the antisocial, and he includes in here passive-aggressive, schizotypal, and borderline as being not sort of the non-anxious personalities. And the argument is, if you can imagine a kind of 3-dimensional space, what this is saying is if you take those 3 dimensions, you can place each of the personality disorders as a point or a small space within that larger space, and describe whatever they are, 11 or more personality disorders in terms of a much simpler 3 dimensions. And there are other solutions for this. Theodore Milan has a solution, and other people have talked about the big 5 personality factors: neuroticism, extroversion, openness to experience, warmth, and I can't think of the 5 at the moment, but that you can describe personality disorders within that set of dimensions that tends to describe normal personality as well. The positive thing to say is that the DSM has promoted research on the personality disorders, but that's happened partly because the personality disorder diagnoses are so problematic in this system. And we'll take a break there and go on to talk about schizophrenia after the break.